Chapter 6, The Walk, October 15th, White Cane Awareness Day, a Saturday, 1 week, almost to the hour, since the morning at a slice of Paris when everything had shifted, recognized nationally every year, a date that asked people to notice what they usually walked past without thinking. Carol had been marking it with Vision by the Sea since the group's first year, in whatever small way she could manage, a gathering, a guest speaker, once, just the three of them walking the route alone because that was all she had. Vision by the Sea met on the first Friday of every month at the Florida Eye Institute, on Indian River Boulevard. Members with visual impairments, family members, caregivers, anyone navigating a world that wasn't built with them in mind. It was Carol's group. She had started it, facilitated it, grown it from a handful of people in a borrowed meeting room to something that had its own rhythm, and its own quiet momentum. This year, for the first time, they had enough members to do it properly. A real walk, a real route, enough white canes moving together through the streets of Vero Beach that people would stop and notice. That was the point. The meetings were inward, a place to share, process, learn, a place where people could say the things they couldn't say at home to people who understood without needing them explained. The walk was outward. It said, "We are here, and this is our town too." Carol had been planning this one for 6 weeks. Not just the route, though she had walked it herself 3 times, noting where the pavement changed, where the curb cuts were, where the shade came and went, where the sound of traffic would make it harder to hear the canes feedback from the ground. She had noted a section of Bougainvillea Lane where the pavement had heaved slightly from tree roots. Nothing that would stop anyone, but enough to require a word of warning. She had noted the sandwich board that appeared most mornings outside the Costa d'Este, and the SUV that regularly parked with its bumper across the curb cut at the corner of Ocean Drive. She had also noted what the route would feel like, the calm of Cardinal Drive in the morning, the way the ocean sound built as you moved south, the coffee smell that reached you before Waldo's was visible. She had planned the route not just as a navigator, but as a person who moved through the world, the way her members moved through it. That was the difference between planning a walk and planning this one. Not a demonstration, not a lesson, a walk. People who belonged here, moving through the place they lived. Mary arrived at the post office on Cardinal Drive at 8:15. The ocean was close enough to smell, salt and something faintly green, the particular mix that meant low tide and morning. Gulls moved overhead, and hurried. A few pelicans sat on a post near the sea wall across the street, as if they had appointments later, and weren't concerned. Vision by the Sea had gathered on the flat apron of concrete in front of the building. 22 people, maybe 25. Mary looked at them, really looked, the way she hadn't quite managed at the monthly meetings, where the work of the room took most of her attention. Some had white canes extended, reading the ground around them with the easy arc of people for whom this had become entirely natural. Some held them loosely at their sides, a few in sunglasses against the early glare, not because they needed shade but because the morning light was still angled and sharp. Walter was near the back, 68, broad-shouldered, holding his cane the way people held things they weren't yet sure of, careful, slightly apart from his body. Maureen stood near the middle, 63, from her color, 30% vision in her left eye. She described it once as looking through wax paper, which had lodged in Mary's memory and stayed there. She'd been a teacher for 30 years and it showed in the way she held herself in a group, alert, present, instinctively aware of where everyone was. Near the front, a young man Mary didn't recognize stood with an older woman who was clearly his mother, the particular posture of a parent standing close but not too close, present without hovering. He had the deliberate stillness of someone who had recently lost significant vision, and was still learning what the world sounded like when you paid attention to it. A woman in her 50s stood slightly apart, hands folded over the handle of her cane, talking quietly with David Thompson. She had the settled ease of someone who had been navigating this way for years, and had long since made her peace with it. Her name was Grace, and she had been with Vision by the Sea since the second meeting. Carol once mentioned to Mary that she was the person you called at 3 in the morning when a new member was having trouble. Carol stood near the low wall at the edge of the steps, straight-backed, cane in hand. She was already reading the group. Mary could see it in the slight angle of her head, the way she was tracking voices, positions, the quality of how people were standing. 20 years behind a salon chair had given Carol an instinct for this. You learned, in a salon, to read the room the moment you walked into it. Who was relaxed, who was tense, who needed to talk and who needed quiet. You made people comfortable before they knew they needed comforting. It was a skill that went with you long after the salon was gone. How are you feeling? Mary asked. Good, Carol said. Mary knew that tone. It meant focused. David Thompson moved through the group with the ease of someone who had done this in a dozen different towns, and understood that ease was part of what he was there to offer. He shook hands, remembered names, said something specific to each person. Not generic encouragement, but the particular thing that applied to that person. He had a calm about him that wasn't performed. The kind that came from having done this work long enough to know what actually helped, and what was just noise. Carol introduced him simply. David works with groups like ours in Palm Beach and Martin County, she said. He's been doing this for 15 years. David shook his head slightly. 17, but who's counting? A few people smiled. The group gathered before they set off. David in the center, not at the front, which Mary noticed. He wasn't leading, he was among. Before we go, he said, does anyone have questions? About the walk, or anything else? A few people shifted. The easy kind, expectant rather than uncomfortable. Then Walter raised his hand. Not high, just enough. I have a question, he said. About the cane. David turned toward him. Go ahead. Walter stopped. Started again. I keep wanting to use it like a walking stick. Like it's for balance. A pause. But that's not right. No, David said. It's not for balance. It's for information. Walter nodded slowly. So how do you actually do it right? David stepped forward. Can I show you? Walter handed the cane over without hesitation, which told Carol something about him. Some people couldn't do that yet. The cane had become either a source of shame or a lifeline, and either way they couldn't let it go. Walter just handed it over. He wanted to learn more than he wanted to hold on. The cane moves ahead of you, David said, demonstrating the arc slowly. Left foot forward, cane goes right. Right foot forward, cane goes left. Always opposite. Always one step ahead of your body. He swept it again, the tip reading the concrete in a clean arc. It's not pointing where you're going. It's clearing the path before you arrive. He handed it back. Walter tried it. The arc was stiff, effortful. It feels wrong, Walter said. It will for a while, David said, until it doesn't. The same way driving felt wrong the first time, or typing, or anything that becomes automatic. It has to go through the stage of feeling wrong first. Walter tried again. The group went quiet the way people went quiet when they were used to listening, not the polite quiet of an audience, but the focused kind, where every small sound had meaning. The arc of Walter's cane on the concrete, the slight scrape as he adjusted his grip, the change in rhythm as he tried again. He stood very still for a moment. So it's like, he thought about it. It's like it's easy for you, in a way, David said. Yes, it gathers information you can't gather with your eyes. Surface texture, is this pavement or gravel or grass? Edge detection, am I near a curb, a step, a drop? Obstacle detection, is there something in my path before I reach it? Your eyes do all of that so fast you've never had to think about it. The cane does it consciously. It takes longer at first. It becomes faster. Walter turned the cane slowly in his hands. Something settled in him, a small shift, the kind that happened when a person recalibrated something they thought they understood. He tried the arc again, smoother. Mary didn't say anything. Neither did Nancy. Carol stood close enough to hear his breathing even out. From somewhere down toward the beach, children's voices carried up on the morning air, high and bright. The sound of kids who had just seen the ocean, and hadn't decided what to do about it yet. Walter went still. After a moment he said, my grandkids. To no one in particular. No one answered right away. I keep thinking about them, he said. About not, he stopped. About what I won't see. The morning held that for a second. Then Maureen, standing just to his left, said quietly, I know. 2 words. Nothing more. Walter nodded once. That was enough. David let the moment settle before he spoke again. The cane doesn't give you back what you've lost, he said, but it gives you something real. It gives you the ground under your feet, and that's where you start. He paused. Every single person in this group started at the same place, uncertain, resistant, holding a piece of equipment that felt like it belonged to someone else. He looked at Walter, and then one day it didn't feel that way anymore. Walter ran his thumb along the grip once. Then he straightened, that old, broad-shouldered straightening, and said, okay. Just that. Okay. Carol turned her face slightly toward the morning sun. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. "All right," David said to the group, his voice easy again. "Let's walk." They headed south on Cardinal Drive. The ocean was a steady presence to the left, not visible from the sidewalk, but there, the way things you knew well didn't need to be seen to be felt. The air moved in off the water in small, warm gusts, carrying salt and the distant sound of surf. Carol walked near the middle of the group, cane arcing in its steady rhythm. She was listening, not to any one thing, to the whole of it. The group had a sound, a particular acoustic signature that was unlike any other sound she knew. 20-plus white canes in motion created a kind of texture percussion, each one slightly different in its arc and tempo, each one reading different ground, each one sending back different information to different hands. Layered over that, footsteps, the soft shuffle of people adjusting their pace to each other, the silence of people paying close attention to where they were. It was, Carol thought, one of the most specific sounds in the world. She doubted anyone else would ever hear it quite the way she did. Mary fell into step beside Nancy, a little behind. She watched the canes moving together, the gentle left-right sweep of each one, reading the ground a half-step ahead of its owner, not hesitant, not slow, methodical in the way that skilled tool use looked once you understood what you were seeing. "I always thought the cane was for balance," Mary said quietly. Nancy glanced at her. "It's not. It reads the ground," Carol said, "just ahead, without turning. Texture, edge, drop. It tells you what's coming before you get there. Like a radar," Nancy said. "Like paying attention," Carol said, which is something sighted people rarely have to do with their feet. Mary watched Carol's cane moving in its arc. "I didn't know that," she said. "Most people don't," Carol said. Not an accusation, just a fact that had long since stopped surprising her. They turned east onto Camellia Lane, a quieter stretch, one way heading west for cars but wide enough on foot. The trees close on both sides in the shade lasting longer here than anywhere on Cardinal. The sound of the group changed subtly as the surface changed beneath them. Carol had noted the heaved pavement here in her planning walks. "Uneven section ahead," she said, not loudly. "About 4 steps. Tree roots." Several people adjusted without comment. That was the thing about this group. Information moved through it quickly and without drama. David had drifted back along the column, checking in quietly with one person and then another, available without being intrusive, the way a good teacher moved through a room. He paused beside the young man near the front, the one with his mother, and said something that made the young man nod. Not a smile yet, but a nod, which was something. Camellia Lane brought them out onto Ocean Drive at the north end of Humiston Park, the park opening on their right, the Atlantic visible beyond it, wide and particular in the morning light. The sound of the ocean arrived all at once, the way it did when a building or a stand of trees had been blocking it, and then suddenly wasn't. Several people in the group went quiet, not from sadness, from the particular quality of attention that a big sound demands. They were half a block further when the first problem appeared. A silver SUV sat parked with 2 wheels up on the curb, its front bumper jutting squarely across the dropped curb cut at the corner, a specific accommodation designed to allow wheelchairs, canes, and mobility aids to transition from sidewalk to street without stepping down. The group slowed. Carol stopped. She stood very still for a moment, her cane resting lightly on the concrete. Then, "This is what it looks like." Her voice was even, not angry, not resigned, not performing for the watching bystanders who had begun to take notice of the group, just clear. "The curb cut is blocked," she continued, "which means anyone navigating by edge detection, following the line of the curb to find the drop point, hits a car bumper instead of open pavement." She paused. "Anyone in a wheelchair can't cross here at all without going into the street at an angle. Anyone with a cane has to change their approach, reorient, find another path." Mary looked at the car. A bumper sticker, a coffee cup in the holder, ordinary and oblivious. Maureen, standing nearby, nodded once. Grace, further back, said quietly, "Every single day." David had stepped to the side. This was Carol's moment and he knew it. The group navigated around the SUV, some stepping into the street, some waiting for a gap in traffic. It took longer than it should have. A cyclist slowed, confused by the cluster of people at the corner, then swerved past without stopping. Nobody said anything. The extra time spoke for itself. They turned north on Ocean Drive, the ocean now on their right. Waldo's appeared ahead, the outdoor bar tucked against the driftwood's beachside. its thatched roof and string lights quiet at this hour, but carrying the unmistakable suggestion of what it would be by afternoon. The chairs were stacked. A man was hosing down the deck. "Little early," Nancy said. "For us," Mary replied. "Speak for yourself," Nancy said. A few people nearby smiled. The driftwood itself rose just beyond weathered driftwood, salvaged beams, the particular silhouette of something built without plans by a man who worked by voice command and strong opinions. It looked exactly as old as it was, which was 1935, which was to say it looked like it had been here long enough to stop worrying about it. "You can smell the history in that one," Nancy said. Carol tilted her head. "Salt, old wood, something floral." "That's the driftwood," Mary said. "Waldo Sexton built it from salvaged wood. No plans, just shouted instructions to his crew and a very clear idea of what he wanted. And it's still here," Walter said, from just behind them. "National Register of Historic Places," Mary said. Walter nodded slowly. "Good." A little further north, the Costa Diaz Resort appeared on their right, its clean lines and warm lighting visible even at this hour. A sandwich board on the sidewalk advertising fresh juice and daily specials in cheerful chalk lettering. A woman in an apron was arranging something in the doorway, and looked up as the group approached. Her face moved through several expressions quickly. Surprise, recognition, something close to embarrassment. She moved the board without being asked, pulling it flush against the wall. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't think." "Thank you," Carol said. Not pointed, not warm either, just sufficient. They kept moving north. It was near the end of that block that the child appeared. A boy, maybe 7, standing with a woman who was almost certainly his grandmother on the edge of the sidewalk, watching the group approach with the open, unguarded attention that children had before they learned to pretend they weren't looking. His eyes went to the canes, all of them, moving together. "Grandma," he said, not quietly, "why do they all have sticks?" The grandmother made a small paint sound and touched his shoulder. But Maureen was already smiling. She stopped in front of the boy, not in a way that blocked the group, just stepped slightly to the side. A natural pause in the flow. "They're not sticks," she said. "They're white canes." The boy looked up at her. "What do they do?" Maureen tapped hers lightly on the sidewalk. "This one tells me what's in front of me before I get there. Cracks, curbs, steps, things I might not see. Because you can't see. Because I don't see the same way you do," Maureen said. "Some of us see a little. Some of us don't see at all. The cane helps either way." The boy considered this with great seriousness. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "Not seeing?" Maureen tilted her head. "Not the way you mean," she said. "It's just different. Like how you probably can't wiggle your ears." The boy immediately tried to wiggle his ears. Maureen laughed. "A real one, short and warm. You get used to what you have," she said, "and you figure out the rest." The boy looked at the cane in her hand. "Can I try it?" Maureen glanced at his grandmother, who nodded. "Hold it at the bottom of the handle," Maureen said, guiding his grip. "Now move it left and right. Not too fast, like you're clearing a path." The boy swept it carefully across the sidewalk. His face changed. "It makes a different sound on the crack," he said. "In the pavement, it sounds different." "Yes," Maureen said. "That's how you know." The boy handed it back with the careful attention of someone returning something important. "Thank you," he said. The grandmother was watching with an expression Mary couldn't quite name. Not pity. Something quieter and more complicated, the look of a person who had just understood something they hadn't known they didn't understand. "Thank you," the woman said to Maureen. Maureen gave a small nod and rejoined the group. Carol said nothing for half a block. Then, quietly, "She's good at that. She was a teacher," Mary said. 30 years. "It shows," Carol said. "She let him discover it himself. She didn't explain it to him. She let him feel it." Mary thought about that. The sound on the crack. The boy's face changing. Yes, that was exactly it. They reached Beachland Boulevard a few minutes later, the wider cross street that marked the top of the walking stretch, where Ocean Drive met the road back toward Cardinal Drive, the official end of the route. Carol stood near the edge of the group, face turned slightly toward the water. "This is where we end," she said. "The walk is complete." The group began to disperse, small clusters forming, hands shaken, thanks exchanged. Maureen touched Carol's arm briefly. Grace said something to David that made him nod. Walter stood a little apart, cane in hand, watching it happen around him the way he had watched most of the morning. with the quiet attention of someone filing things away. Mary was finishing a goodbye with Maureen when Nancy touched her arm. "Do you smell that?" Nancy said. Mary breathed in. Something from the south, the grill at Waldo's, 3 blocks back the way they'd come. Blackened fish, something citrusy underneath. Waldo's, Mary said. 3 blocks south on the way back. They had walked right past it on the way up. A walk was a walk. Not a restaurant visit, but the return trip was another matter entirely. Maureen appeared at Carol's elbow. "Someone mentioned lunch." "Did someone?" Carol said. "Not a question. The smell is rather persuasive," Grace said, from behind her. Carol was quiet for a moment. Then the faintest smile. "Waldo's is 3 blocks south," Carol said. "On our way back. Anyone who'd like lunch is welcome." The group did not require further encouragement. Several people said their goodbyes at Beachland and headed back toward Cardinal Drive on their own. The gals walked south on the ocean side with Maureen, Grace, Walter, and David Waldo's appearing ahead as they came back down the block, its weathered facade catching the midday sun. The smell of the grill reached them before the entrance did. Something blackened and citrusy, warm in the salt air. Older looking somehow. The way buildings reveal different things depending on which direction you approach them from. Walter was one of the last ones through Waldo's door. He paused in the entrance for just a moment, Kane reading the threshold. The warm air of the restaurant reaching him. The sound of chairs and coffee cups and morning conversation settling around him. Then he went in. Carol heard the door close behind him. Not just a shape this time. Something with a little more weight to it. After lunch, the remaining group said their goodbyes outside Waldo's, some heading back up Cardinal Drive, some toward the beach, some lingering on the sidewalk, the way people do when something has gone well, and nobody is quite ready to say it out loud. The gals hung back, letting it happen around them. Carol stood near the entrance to Waldo's, cane in hand, face tilted slightly toward the water. Then the group began to thin, some toward the beach, some back up toward Cardinal Drive. The gals drifted with them, 1 block west, into the quieter shade of Cardinal Drive. The post office was small and familiar looking, the kind that belonged to a beach neighborhood rather than a city, and its doors were open. 2 people came out talking at once, neither to each other, both loudly enough to carry. A woman's voice, tight, again. 42nd Avenue. I live on 42nd Avenue, not 42nd Street. They are not the same address. And a man's, gruff, unmistakably Brooklyn, 87 cents. For a stamp. Forever stamps are getting forever expensive. They've mixed it up 3 times now. It's getting to be too much. Footsteps separated. The woman came down the steps, quick, still irritated. A moment later she moved off along the sidewalk. Carol turned her head slightly. Mary appeared at her elbow and went quiet. "Who was that?" Carol asked. "I'm not sure," Mary said. "Red nails, red bag, necklace to match." She paused. "Actually," she turned it over for a moment. "She reminded me of someone." Nancy arrived beside them. "What did I miss?" Mary glanced at her. "The woman from the garden. The one with the beads." Nancy looked in the direction the woman had gone. "Could be the same person." "Could be," Mary said. "I only caught a glimpse." Carol didn't answer. 42nd Avenue, she thought. Not 42nd Street. She filed it away. Just a shape. For now. Chapter 7. Waldo's. Waldo's sat at the edge of the Driftwood Resort on Ocean Drive. The way something genuinely old sits anywhere with a complete indifference to whether you found it impressive. The building had been built in 1935 by Waldo Sexton, a Vero Beach original who constructed it from cypress logs hauled out of the swamps around Blue Cypress Lake, shouting instructions to his crew without blueprints, without plans, apparently without any clear intention of making anything level or square. The result was a 2-story structure that listed and leaned and creaked in the sea breeze, with the confidence of something that had never needed to be straight to be right. The inside was filled, over decades, from across the state and beyond it, with what the Driftwood's management called, with evident affection, a menagerie of monstrosities: ship's wheels, cannons, old Italian chests, locomotive bells, mission bells, a bell said to have belonged to Harriet Beecher Stowe. Anyone could ring a bell. Most people did. It was that kind of place. The group had moved there from Cardinal Drive after the walk, not because anyone had formally decided on it, but because it was where you went in Vero Beach, when you wanted to sit by the water and be fed without ceremony. The deck overlooked the ocean, The midday light was broad and white on the water, and the smell of the grill, blackened fish, something with citrus, reached them before they found their table. Carol settled into her chair, and angled her glasses toward the specials board on the wall near the counter. "Today's special," the glasses said quietly. "Blackened mahi sand." A pause. "Blackened mahi sand." Another pause. Text partially obscured. "Estimated, sandwich or similar." "What are the specials?" Carol asked Mary. Mary looked at the board. "Blackened mahi sandwich, and a shrimp taco plate." "Thank you," Carol said. She took the glasses off and folded them on the table. 8 months and they still couldn't handle a busy restaurant specials board at any distance. She had filed a complaint with the company's accessibility team. She had received a cheerful email about upcoming improvements. She ordered the coconut shrimp. She had decided on the way over. Mary dropped into her chair and looked at Nancy. 7 blocks. Nancy settled beside her. We walked 7 blocks. We did. Mary shook her head. It felt like much longer. Nancy picked up the menu. Not the distance. The walking. Carol reached for her coffee, her cane folded and resting on the seat beside her. "That's the point." Mary looked out toward the ocean, visible now from their table. Blue and ordinary and enormous, and thought about curb cuts and sandwich boards, and a boy learning to hear a crack in the pavement, and a man named Walter learning to hold a cane correctly on a Thursday morning in October. 7 blocks. It had felt like much longer, because it was. The tables filled and emptied slowly around them. Waldo's doing what it did best, feeding people without fuss, in a room that had the quality of a place that had been doing this long enough to be comfortable with itself. Walter had found a seat 2 tables over, and was working through a blackened mahi sandwich, with the focused attention of someone who had earned his lunch. He had his notebook open beside the plate. "Someone mentioned," Maureen said, leaning toward Carol, "that there's a French bakery on 17th. A slice of Paris." "They were talking about it on the walk," said. "The croissants are extraordinary." "They are," Carol said. "The lamination, the way she builds the layers. There are maybe 3 people in this county who do it the way Michelle does." "Michelle?" "The owner. She's in France at the moment, actually, studying." Maureen smiled. "Of course she is. She'll come back better," Carol said. "She always does." Walter sat 2 tables over with Grace, and the young man whose name Mary had learned was Daniel. Grace was talking, not demonstrating anything, just talking, the way people talked when they had information worth sharing and knew how to share it. Daniel was listening with the focused attention of someone who was still in the stage where everything was new and therefore everything mattered. Walter watched them with the quiet attention of someone taking everything in. Mary watched Walter. He was doing what she had been doing, learning by observing people who were further along than he was, seeing what it looked like to have arrived somewhere he hadn't reached yet. She understood that completely. Maureen was at the counter ordering something to go. She had family coming for lunch, she'd mentioned, her daughter and the grandchildren, and she wanted to be back before they arrived. She paid and tucked the bag under her arm, and came back to touch Carol's shoulder briefly on her way out. "Same time next year." "Same time next year," Carol said, "except bigger." Maureen smiled and went. David Thompson stopped by the table before he left, just for a moment, coffee in hand. "Good group," he said to Carol. "Yes, Walter's going to be fine." "I know," Carol said. David nodded. "First Friday. I'll try to come. We'd be glad to have you." He lifted his coffee briefly and moved toward the door. Carol was quiet for a moment after he left. "He means it. About coming back." "How do you know?" Nancy asked. "The way he said it," Carol said. "Some people say things like that and it's a courtesy." He said it like a plan. Mary believed her. After lunch, the group began to make their way back toward Cardinal Drive in 1s and 2s. Carol stayed at the table a few minutes longer than the others, her coffee half finished, the morning settling around her. Walter passed on his way out. He paused beside her chair. "Thank you for the call. First Friday of next month," Carol said. "Florida Eye Institute, Indian River Boulevard, 1 o'clock. We'd be glad to have you." Walter adjusted his grip on the cane, and walked out into the morning. Mary watched him go, then looked back at Carol. Nancy was still at the table too, her Pinot Grigio long finished, turning her glass slowly. "We should talk about Saturday," Nancy said, not loudly, just present, the way she brought things back when they needed to come back. Mary nodded. They had spent the morning walking and watching and eating, and being in the world, the way Carol had wanted them to be. It had been exactly right, but Topher was still in a hospital bed, and the smell Nancy had noticed was still unidentified, and the woman with the red necklace was still out there doing whatever she did on a Saturday afternoon, when she wasn't standing in bakeries watching people collapse. The smell, Mary said. The smell, Nancy agreed. Carol was very still beside them. And the address, she said. Mary looked at her. The woman at the post office, Carol said. 42nd Avenue, not 42nd Street. She paused. I keep returning to the way she said it. Not frustrated the way people are when they've been told something once and it hasn't registered. Precise. The way you are when something matters and you want no ambiguity whatsoever. Mary thought about it. Like someone who's had this problem before, she said, and needs it not to happen again. Yes, Carol said. Exactly like that. They sat with it for a moment. The midday light coming through Waldo's windows. The street outside ordinary and unhurried. The ocean a block away doing what it always did. Same table next week, Nancy said finally, pushing back her chair. Same table, Mary said. Carol reached for her cane. She didn't say anything else, but the address was still with her as they stepped outside. 42nd Avenue, not 42nd Street. Sitting in the place where she kept things that weren't ready to become conclusions. Just a shape. For now. Chapter 8, Tiptoe Nails. The nail salon smelled faintly of acetone, lavender, and something sugary that didn't quite belong to either. Mary sat back in the padded chair at Tiptoe Nails, hands resting in her lap, trying to decide if this counted as relaxation or obligation. Remind me, she said, why we're here again? Because presentation matters, Nancy said. Mary glanced sideways. To who? Nancy didn't look up. Everyone. Carol smiled from the chair beside them, her fingers resting lightly on the armrest. Also, it's nice. That feels suspicious, Mary said. The salon hummed with low conversation and the soft, steady rhythm of filing, buffing, and water running somewhere in the back. Not loud, not quiet, just full. There are more people than usual, she said. Nancy nodded. Season. Mary let out a small breath. October. The technician who had settled beside Mary was a young woman named Kim who worked with focused efficiency. She took nails seriously as a craft. She had asked 3 questions, shape, length, color, and then proceeded without second-guessing herself. Mary found it restful. The choice of color had taken longer than expected, not because she couldn't decide, but because the names on the little bottles were so entertainingly specific that she'd spent several minutes reading them aloud. Mellow my troubles, she said. No, Nancy said. Why not? 2 on the nose. I don't give a Rotterdam. That one I respect. Ballet slipper, Carol said. Both of them looked at her. It's a classic, Carol said. It goes with everything. How do you know what goes with everything? Nancy asked. Carol smiled. I remember colors. Nancy went back to her phone. Mary chose ballet slipper. Carol's technician, a small, older woman who introduced herself simply as May, had a way of working that Carol had identified within the first 30 seconds as deliberate and unhurried. She didn't rush. She also didn't speak unnecessarily. Carol found this ideal. Some technicians felt obligated to fill every silence with conversation. May understood that silence was its own courtesy. Carol had given herself over to the sensory particulars of the space. The acetone smell, sharp and clean. The lavender from some kind of diffuser near the back, artificial, but not unpleasant. The sugary undertone she couldn't quite place, possibly from a candle somewhere out of range. Beneath all of it, the particular warmth of a room full of women doing something small and deliberate for themselves. The chair vibrated faintly with a massage function nobody had turned on. The acoustic signature of the room was soft and layered. Voices at low volume. The scrape and buff of tools on nails. The occasional laugh that came out sharper than intended before being pulled back to match the room's tone. Carol had spent enough time in enough places to understand that every room had an emotional key. This one was in a major key, unhurried, self-possessed. People here were managing small pleasures without apology. It was a comfortable sound. She let herself be carried by it. Then the conversation across the room shifted. Colors chosen, hands positioned, the small rituals taking over. That was when the conversation across the room changed. Not loudly, just enough. 2 women across the room leaned closer to each other. Mary didn't mean to listen, but she did, and nobody across the room thought to lower their voice. 3 older women getting their nails done, nothing they're worth managing. Nothing there worth noticing at all. Mary had been invisible long enough to understand this was not an accident. It was a condition. One you could either resent or use. She used it. I'm telling you, something's missing, one of them said. From where? The other asked. The bakery. A slice of Paris. Mary stilled. Nancy's eyes flicked up immediately. What's missing? The second woman asked. I don't know exactly. Small things at first, then bigger. Michelle's gold medal is gone now. The one from the regional competition. It was in the shadow box behind the counter. Mary glanced at Nancy. Nancy didn't speak, but she was listening now. Michelle won that, the second woman said. That's not a small thing. No, the first woman agreed. And apparently they're not the only things missing. Utensils, a small decorative piece, a napkin ring. Things that kept disappearing and everyone assumed they'd been misplaced. Mary sat with the accumulation of it. Small things first, then the medal. The pattern of someone taking systematically, not impulsively, or the pattern of something else entirely. A cat gathering materials for a den, she thought, absurdly, and almost dismissed it before filing it anyway. Who would steal from there? The second woman asked. That's the thing, the first woman said. Some of the staff think the place is haunted. The second woman blinked. Haunted. I know, but think about it. Sam and Michelle leave Saturday morning. That same morning Topher collapses inside the bakery. He was there having coffee when it happened. And then things start disappearing. A sugar spoon, 2 of the good monogrammed napkins, a little fish-shaped bottle stopper off the bar cart. She set down her pen. One of the girls said she heard something in the storage area late in the afternoon. A rustling, like something moving around back there. A mouse, the second woman said. That's what she thought, but there was nothing there when she looked. Just Athene on her stool looking like she hadn't moved all day. Cats look like that even when they've been up to everything, the second woman said. I know, but still. The timing, the things disappearing, the noises. The first woman lowered her voice. One of the younger girls won't go in the storage room alone anymore. A small pause, and then there's the woman. The first woman continued. Which woman? The one in the disguise, with the notebook. She comes in almost every day now and she is. The first woman seemed to search for the right word. A lot. A lot how? Well, 3 days ago she tried to look into the back kitchen, to watch the lamination process. Apparently, she leaned over the end of the display case to get a better angle and, the first woman stopped. Started again. You know the tray of croissants they keep on the left side of the case? The ones that take 2 hours to proof. Yes, gone. The second woman stared. She knocked them over? She knocked them over. All of them. The tray hits the floor. Croissants everywhere. And this woman just. The first woman's voice contained the particular restraint of someone trying not to laugh. She straightens up, smooths her scarf, and gives this very composed smile, like she's posing for a photograph. Was someone taking a photograph? Someone was taking a video of the croissants on the floor. A short silence. She thought they were photographing her, the second woman said slowly. She absolutely thought they were photographing her. She did a little nod, very dignified. The first woman gave up trying not to laugh. The staff are beside themselves. They can't decide if she's dangerous or just catastrophically unaware. What happened then? She asked if she could go into the back kitchen to observe the process. Very politely, very formally, like she was requesting a private tour. And they said absolutely not and asked her to please not lean on the display cases. And she wrote something in her notebook and left. She wrote it down. She writes everything down. The proofing times. The folding technique. She timed something with her phone once, just stood there with her phone out, counting. Mary looked at Nancy. Nancy looked at Mary. And then the gold medal went missing. The first woman continued, her voice dropping back towards serious. And she was the last person seen near the shadow box, actually touching the ribbon. That doesn't mean she took it. No, the first woman agreed. But it doesn't look good, especially with everything else that's been disappearing. She shook her head. The staff are convinced she either took it or the ghost did, and they're about 50-50 on which. Who would steal from there? The second woman asked. The first woman lowered her voice. That woman, the one who's been hanging around. Mary leaned back slightly. Blanchette, Nancy murmured. Mary frowned. Something about the name pulled at her, familiar in a way she couldn't locate. She let it go. Carol's fingers tightened faintly on the armrest. Across the room, the conversation continued. She's always there, the first woman said. Watching, writing things down. And the medal, I heard someone saw her handling the ribbon, actually touching it. That doesn't mean she stole it. No, but it doesn't mean she didn't. And she's dressed so oddly. Big sunglasses indoors, a silk scarf tied over her hair like it's 1962, like she doesn't want to be recognized. The second woman made a small sound. Recognized as what? I have no idea, the first woman said, but she seems to think someone might. Mary felt something settle low in her chest. Not belief, not yet, but possibility. Kim worked on Mary's left hand with the quiet attention of someone who had stopped listening to other people's conversations years ago. As a matter of professional courtesy, Mary was grateful for that. It allowed her to think. She thought about what she was hearing and tried to hold it without conclusion. The way Carol held things, as shapes rather than answers. A woman watching, writing things down, timing things, touching a ribbon she had no business touching, dressed in a way that drew attention rather than deflected it. It could be what it looked like, but it felt like something else. She couldn't say why. She just felt it. The door chimed. A small, bright sound that cut through the room. Mary glanced up. The woman who stepped inside was not dressed for a nail salon. She was dressed for a covert operation. Large sunglasses, the oversized kind that took up most of her face. A silk scarf in a muted floral print, tied firmly under the chin in a style that was either vintage glamour or deeply confused. A bag over her shoulder that looked heavier than it needed to be. And in her hand, a small notebook. She was also, Mary noticed, slightly out of breath. Not dramatically, just a look of someone who had been moving quickly, and was now trying to appear as though she hadn't been. She paused just inside a door and looked around with the careful, measured attention of someone assessing the room for threats. Then seemed to decide it was acceptable and let the door close behind her. Then, with the air of a woman stepping off a stage, she removed the sunglasses, folded them into her bag, and unwound the scarf from her hair with practiced efficiency. She shook her hair out, straightened her collar, and became, quite suddenly, an ordinary woman in a nail salon rather than whatever she had been outside. The nail salon sat 2 doors down from a slice of Paris on the same block, a barber shop between them, then this, close enough to duck into quickly, far enough to feel like somewhere else. The disguise was for the bakery. In here, she could simply be herself. Mary watched the transformation with the close attention of someone trying to place a face. Nancy saw it too. "That's her," Nancy said quietly. Carol turned her head toward the sound of the door. "She looks," Mary started. She didn't have a word for it. "Familiar," Nancy supplied. "I was going to say theatrical," Mary said. "Also that," Nancy said. Mary looked more closely. Something about the way the woman moved, the set of her shoulders, the deliberate way she assessed a room, was pulling at a memory she couldn't locate yet. Carol said nothing, but Mary could tell she was listening harder now. Blanchett, for it was clearly Blanchett, though the disguise seemed to suggest otherwise, spoke softly with the woman at the front desk, then moved toward the chairs along the wall. As she passed a small display of nail polish near the window, her phone rang. She answered immediately, needing something to do with her hands. "Yes," she said, her voice just slightly too controlled. "Yes, I'm fine. I stepped out for a moment." A pause. "No, it's fine. It's completely fine." She lowered her voice further. "I haven't told them who I am. I can't. It would change everything." Another pause. "Because they treat me differently, that's why. I need them to act naturally so I can observe the process." Her voice steadied slightly as she found the familiar ground of the subject. "The scarf is fine. Nobody's recognized me. I'm essentially invisible." Mary looked at Nancy. Nancy looked at Mary. Neither of them said anything. Across the room, a woman getting a manicure was watching Blanchett with open interest. A second woman had turned slightly in her chair. A third had simply stopped pretending to look at her phone. "I just need a few more weeks," Blanchett continued. "I'm building my technique organically. You can't rush lamination. I know because I've been timing it." She reached the chairs, sat down, and opened her notebook with one hand while still holding the phone. "Tell the producers at the Rise I'll be ready. I have notes." She hung up, took out a pen, and began to write. Mary watched longer than she meant to. It wasn't just the writing. It was the way Blanchett looked up between notes, not at anyone in particular, but around, taking things in. The scarf had slipped slightly to one side. On one of these sweeps, her gaze landed briefly on Mary. It stayed for just a half second longer than the others, then moved on. Something in the way she looked, the slight hesitation, the faint crease between her brows before she looked away, suggested the kind of almost recognition that happened when a face belonged to a context you couldn't quite reconstruct. Not a stranger, not quite a known person, something in between. She went back to her notebook. She was, Mary thought, the least invisible person in the room. Maybe she's a writer, Mary said. Maybe she's a spy, Nancy said. She's not a spy, Mary said. She's dressed like one. She's counting, Carol said. Mary blinked. What? Carol's brow furrowed. Not numbers, she said. Patterns, movement, timing. Nancy turned toward her. How can you tell? Carol shook her head once. I don't know. It's just the way she pauses. Mary looked back at Blanchett, wrote, looked again. It was unsettling. Not because it was threatening, but because it didn't quite fit. The two women across the room were still talking, and apparently, the first one continued. She asked one of the girls behind the counter how long they proofed the dough. Just walked up and asked. Very casual. That's odd. That's what I said. And then she timed something with her phone. Just stood there with her phone out, counting. The woman shook her head. Michelle caught her crouching near the display case once, not touching anything, just watching through the glass. Watching what? The lamination. Apparently she had her notebook out. Why would anyone? I don't know, the first woman said. But Michelle was so flustered she offered to help, and the woman said she was just browsing. Browsing the lamination. At a bakery. A pause. And then there's the middle, the first woman continued. She stood in front of it for a long time, really looked at it, touched the ribbon end. She lowered her voice, and then the next day it was gone. The second woman exhaled. That doesn't look good. No, the first woman agreed. It really doesn't. Mary sat with all of it. The notebook, the timing, the odd questions, the crouching, and the medal. It looked bad, she had to admit. It looked very bad. But something about it didn't sit right either, something she couldn't quite name. Not the snooping, which was undeniably strange. Not even the disguise, which was its own particular brand of baffling. It was the sunglasses. Nobody trying to steal something wore sunglasses indoors at a nail salon. They drew attention, which meant Blanchett wasn't trying to hide. She was trying to be mysterious. Those were different things entirely. Kim set down Mary's hand gently and moved to the other one. Mary looked at the finished left, the soft pink, barely there. Exactly right. She had the brief, irrelevant thought that ballet slipper really did go with everything. Then the room changed. Not loudly, not with warning. It simply changed. Two uniformed officers stepped inside. The conversations didn't stop, but they slowed, subtly, the way conversations slowed when something entered a room that required attention. Movement became slightly more deliberate. Chairs shifted. Eyes moved without heads moving. The officers spoke briefly with the front desk, then turned, and walked toward Blanchett. Mary felt it before anything was said. That tightening, that quiet, collective awareness. Kim kept working, unhurried. But Mary noticed she had moved slightly so that her back was no longer to the unfolding scene. Ma'am, one of the officers said. Blanchett looked up. Yes, the sunglasses were still on. Would you mind standing up for a moment? Confusion flickered across her face, but she did. What is this about? The second officer spoke. We've had a report regarding a missing item from a slice of Paris. Mary's stomach tightened. A gold medal, the officer continued. From behind the counter. Blanchett blinked. I don't understand. Do you have anything in your bag that doesn't belong to you? The room held its breath. Blanchett shook her head quickly. No, of course not. Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us. That's not necessary, she said, her voice tightening. I haven't done anything wrong. She paused. I was simply conducting research. The officer looked at her. Research, he said. Yes, Blanchett said, with the dignity of someone who felt this should be self-evident. For a television project. The officer's expression did not change. Ma'am, Mary felt something twist in her chest. Blanchett looked around the room, searching, the way a person did when they needed something solid to hold on to. Her eyes moved from face to face, strangers, all of them, and then stopped. On Mary. That same slight hesitation from earlier. The half-second pause she'd made during the notebook watching. The one that had suggested almost recognition. Only now, with everything stripped away, the composed manner, the research project, the careful construction of the afternoon, she almost became something. She knew that face. She just couldn't find it. Blanchett said. She blinked. Her hand came up and then dropped. I know you. Mary looked at her. Chris, Blanchett said suddenly, the word arriving before the full thought did. Chris's mum. She said it with the relief of someone finding the right word after a long search. It's me, Beverly. Beverly Blanchett. Miss Blanchett. I taught Chris drama. Vero Beach High, his junior year. Her voice caught slightly. I'm sorry, I can't remember. Mary said quietly. Mary Lambert. Mary. Blanchett exhaled the name like it completed something. Please. I didn't take anything. I didn't do anything wrong. You know Chris. You know me. Please. For a half second, Mary didn't move. Then the years collapsed all at once. The auditorium, the folding chairs, Chris on stage in a role he'd been terrified of and then loved. And this woman standing in front of a darkened curtain telling him to breathe. Oh my, Mary said softly. Nancy turned sharply toward Mary. You know her? Mary nodded slowly. She directed Chris in his junior year play, she said. He loved that class. Blanchett nodded quickly. He was wonderful. He always was. Then, softer. Please. The officers stepped in. Mom, I didn't take anything, she said again, still looking at Mary. Not desperate. Not wild. Just certain. And still, somehow, wearing the sunglasses. Mary took a step forward without thinking. Wait, she said. Nancy caught her arm. Mary. Mary hesitated. Because she didn't know. Not really. And that was the problem. Blanchett's expression shifted. Not relief. Not fear. Just understanding. Then the officers guided her toward the door. She didn't resist. But she didn't look away. Please, she said one last time. And then she was gone. The door closed. The room exhaled. For a moment nobody moved. Then May, still sitting beside Carol's hand, very quietly set down her tools and picked them back up again. Kim resumed work on Mary's right hand without comment. The salon found its rhythm, just slower than before. Mary sat back slowly. Her hands felt cold, which was slightly ironic given where she was. That didn't feel right, she said. Nancy didn't answer immediately. No, she said finally. It didn't. Carol spoke softly. She wasn't afraid, Carol murmured. Mary looked at her. What do you mean? She was concerned, confused, but not afraid of being caught. Nancy frowned. You're sure? Carol nodded once. Yes. Mary looked at the door, at the place where Blanchett had been. She was asking for help, Mary said quietly. Nancy turned toward her. From you. Nancy exhaled slowly. Well, she said, that's inconvenient. Mary almost smiled. Almost. But the feeling didn't leave. Because underneath all of it, the sunglasses, the scarf, the notebook, the crouching ear display cases, there was a simpler explanation that nobody had thought to ask for. If Blanchett had just said what she was doing, Mary thought, none of this would have happened. One sentence. That was all it would have taken. They finished their nails. It seemed important, somehow, to do that. To see the small ordinary thing through to the end. Even with everything else sitting in the room with them. Kim worked on Mary's right hand. May finished Carol's with quiet efficiency. Nancy's technician applied a top coat with the focus of someone working on a deadline. When they finally stood to leave, nails finished, bags gathered, the small ritual completed, the salon had settled back into its usual sound. Voices, buffing, water in the back. But the cadence was different. Carol said so softly, as they stepped toward the door. It still hasn't settled. Nancy glanced at her. The room. Saturday, Carol said. The bakery. It still hasn't settled. Mary understood. They stepped outside together into the October light. The sun warm and direct. The street ordinary around them. Nothing out of place. Mary looked at her nails. Ballet slipper. Goes with everything. She reached for her bag. We should find out where she is, she said. Nancy was quiet for a moment. Mary looked at her. You think she did it? Mary said. I think she's probably innocent, Nancy said carefully. Probably. She looked at the nail salon door, then back at Mary. But I also think that in 30 years of taking emergency calls, listening to people describe what was happening to them, what they'd done, what they'd seen, the ones who are genuinely innocent don't usually have to work that hard to explain themselves. She wasn't working hard, Mary said. She was embarrassed. There's a difference between embarrassment and innocence, Nancy said. You think she's lying? I think I don't know yet. Nancy started walking, which is different from thinking she's guilty, and different from thinking she's innocent. She paused. It means we don't know what we don't know yet. Carol had been listening to all of this without speaking. The cat, she said. They both looked at her. If Athena took the ribbon, Carol said, everything else follows from that. The medal, the missing items, the ghost stories. She paused. But we don't know for certain yet that Athena took it. We believe it. We don't know it. Mary looked at her hands. Then at Nancy. So we find out, Mary said. Nancy nodded. Yes. They walked to the car, and they were already carrying it with them. Not just the moment. The decision. They were going to help Blanchett. Ready or not. Chapter 9. To visit Blanchett. The Indian River County Jail visiting room was exactly what Mary had expected and somehow still worse. Institutional chairs bolted to the floor. A table with a scratch across one corner. Light that came from everywhere and flattered nothing. A corrections officer stood near the door with the practiced disengagement of someone who had witnessed a great many difficult conversations and no longer found them remarkable. Mary sat down. Nancy sat beside her. Carol found her chair by touch, folded her cane, and settled with the composed patience she brought to all waiting. They had been here 11 minutes when Blanchett came in. She was still wearing the clothes she'd had on at the nail salon. The neutral blouse, the good slacks, the silk scarf now somewhat askew from wherever it had spent the night. The sunglasses were gone, confiscated presumably, which gave her face a slightly exposed quality. But her posture was something else entirely. She came in expecting to be recognized, with a studied composure, the composure of someone accustomed to managing attention. She sat down across from them, smoothed her slacks once, and looked at Mary with an expression of warm, gracious patience. I'm glad you came. It's important that the right people know what's happening. Mary nodded carefully. We want to help. Of course, Blanchett said, with the warmth of someone who genuinely meant it. Nancy glanced at Mary. Mary kept her expression neutral. Can you tell us, Mary said, what you were doing at a slice of Paris? Blanchett folded her hands on the table. Research. Culinary research. For what? Nancy asked. Blanchett looked at her coffee cup. I've been approached about a television project. The room waited. The rise, Blanchett said, with the gravity of someone announcing the Oscars. A serious baking competition. Netflix. She said the last part with a slight emphasis, as if distinguishing it from other kinds of television. It's not the first time I've been on television. I have some experience with the format. What format? Carol asked. Blanchett looked at her. Have you heard of Nailed It? On Netflix, Carol said. Season 3, Blanchett said, with quiet significance. Nancy sat up slightly. The baking show. Where nobody she stopped. Where the bakers attempt to recreate elaborate cakes, Blanchett said smoothly. And the results are, characterful. Characterful, Nancy said. Yes. Nancy glanced at Mary. Mary looked at her coffee cup. I appeared in season 3, Blanchett said. I won't say more than that. There's a certain profile that comes with that kind of visibility, and I try to manage it thoughtfully. She glanced toward the door, then back, which is why I had to be discreet at the bakery. I couldn't simply walk in as myself. Mary looked at her. As yourself. People recognize me, Blanchett said. It's something you adjust to. Nancy made a very small sound. Mary couldn't tell if it was agreement or the beginning of something else she was suppressing. Carol's face was entirely still. So the disguise, Mary said. The scarf and sunglasses. Necessary, Blanchett said. I couldn't have people treating me differently. I needed to observe the process naturally. Sam and Michelle's lamination technique is extraordinary, the best I've encountered on the Treasure Coast. Their croissants have a specific layering that I haven't been able to replicate. The admission cost her something, but less than it might have. Lamination is something I've always wanted to learn properly. The new show gave me a reason to finally commit to it. Nancy looked at the table. I needed to study the technique without announcing myself, Blanchett continued. So I went in. Several times. I timed the proofing cycles. I watched the fold through the display glass. I asked some questions, carefully. I thought, naturally, and I took notes. The notebook, Mary said. Yes. And the questions, Nancy said. About the dough. The butter temperature. Necessary research, Blanchett said. Someone saw you crouching near the display case, Nancy said. Blanchett's expression shifted slightly. I had a low angle on the lamination. I needed to see the layers from the side. In a bakery, Blanchett agreed, without apparent embarrassment. And the medal, she added, before they could bring it up. I want to address the medal. Mary waited. Michelle's Regional Pastry Award, Blanchett said. The shadow box on the wall. I was looking at it, genuinely. I was moved by it, and I touched the ribbon. She paused. Just the ribbon end. It was hanging out slightly from the case. I wasn't handling the medal. I was touching the ribbon because. She stopped. Because, Mary said. Blanchett looked at her hands. Because I wanted to know what it felt like to have won something like that. The room was quiet for a moment. Mary felt something shift in her chest. I put it back immediately, Blanchett said. The case was slightly open. I touched the ribbon. I let go. I stepped back. She looked up, and then it was gone. And apparently, her voice tightened slightly. Apparently I was the last person seen near it. The cat took it, Carol said quietly. Blanchett blinked. I beg your pardon? Athena, Carol said. The bakery cat. She's been collecting things. Small shiny objects. The ribbon caught her attention. A long pause. The cat, Blanchett said. The cat, Carol confirmed. Blanchett sat with that for a moment. The cat, more softly. She has kittens, Carol added. She was building a den. Something crossed Blanchett's face that wasn't quite a smile, and wasn't quite tears, and was somewhere between the two. Of course she does. Mary leaned forward. Can I ask you something? Blanchett looked at her. When the officers came, Mary said, at the nail salon, why didn't you explain what you were doing? The show, the research. Blanchett was quiet for a moment. Because, she looked at her hands. If I told everyone I was preparing for a baking competition and then I didn't get it, I would have made a fool of myself for nothing. She looked at her hands. And I've already done that on Netflix. I didn't want to do it again in Vero Beach. Mary nodded slowly. Mary nodded. I understand that. Blanchett looked at her. Do you? Yes, Mary said. I do. Another quiet moment. Nancy cleared her throat. Can I ask you something? Blanchett looked at her. The scarf, Nancy said. The sunglasses. The whole, she made a small gesture, situation. Yes, Blanchett said. Did anyone, Nancy paused carefully, recognize you? At the bakery, or anywhere? Blanchett's expression was steady, composed. Not directly. People are often discreet about it. Carol was very still. Mary looked at the table for a moment. Blanchett. Mary's voice was gentle. What show did you say it was? Nailed it, Blanchett said. Season 3. Netflix. And when did it air? May 2019. The silence that followed was not unkind. It was just present. Blanchett looked at Mary, then at Nancy, then at Carol, who was facing slightly to the left of her, as she always did when she was listening to something carefully. Something moved across Blanchett's face. Slow, careful. The particular movement of a realization arriving in stages, because arriving all at once would be too much. Nobody knew. It wasn't a question. Mary didn't answer right away. A pause. Not from the show. No. Blanchett nodded once, very slowly. The scarf. Yes. The sunglasses. Yes. All of it. All of it, Mary said. Another silence. And then, something remarkable happened. Blanchett's shoulders dropped. Not with defeat. Not with humiliation. With relief. It came off her like something physical, the slow release of a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd stopped noticing it. I could have just walked in. Yes, Mary said. I could have said hello. Yes, I could have asked Michelle about the lamination. She would have loved to show you, Mary said. She loves talking about the lamination. Blanchett looked at her. She would have? Absolutely, Mary said. She'd have given you a lesson. A beat. Something that was almost a laugh moved across Blanchett's face. Not quite, but almost. I wore the scarf for 3 weeks. I know, Mary said. In Florida. In October, Nancy said. Yes. Blanchett pressed her lips together. Then, quietly, surprisingly, she did laugh. It was small at first, then less small. The laugh of someone who had just seen the full shape of something absurd and found it, against all expectation, genuinely funny. Mary smiled. Nancy smiled. Carol smiled at the sound of it. A cat, Blanchett said. A cat took the ribbon, and the medal came with it, Carol said. Into a den, for kittens. Blanchett shook her head slowly. Well, yes, Mary said. I suppose, Blanchett said. That is the least dignified possible explanation. It is, Nancy agreed, but it's also the true one. Blanchett looked at her hands again, then up. Can you help me? She asked. Not the way she'd asked at the nail salon. Urgent and frightened and reaching for connection. Differently now. Simply. Yes, Mary said. We're working on it, Nancy said. Carol nodded once. Blanchett exhaled. Thank you. Then, after a moment, tell me about the kittens. Mary smiled. There are 2 of them, still quite small. They don't have names yet. Blanchett was quiet for a moment. Julia and Ramsay. Nancy looked at her. Julia Child and Gordon Ramsay? If I'm going to be serious about cooking, Blanchett said, with the first real dignity she'd shown since sitting down, I should commit to it properly. Mary laughed, and the corrections officer near the door, who had witnessed a great many difficult conversations, looked up briefly, because laughter in this room was less common than it should have been, and then looked away again. Outside, the morning continued without them. Inside, something had settled. Not everything. Not yet, but enough to keep going. They didn't speak until they were outside and halfway to the car. Then Nancy said, I believe her. Mary looked at her. But, no but, Nancy said, I believe her. She unlocked the car. I just wanted on record that I also believed her about the disguise working. The disguise absolutely did not work, Mary said. No, Nancy agreed. It did not. Carol settled into the back seat. What matters is whether the cat can be confirmed. Everything else, the research, the notebook, the lamination, is consistent with what she said. The medal is the only piece that requires physical evidence. The den, Nancy said. The den, Carol confirmed. If Athena has been collecting things, and the staff have been reporting missing items for weeks, which fits, then finding what's in that den resolves it completely. And if the den doesn't have the medal? Mary asked. A pause. Then we have a harder conversation, Nancy said. She started the car. But I don't think it comes to that. Mary looked out the window as they pulled away from the jail. She thought about Blanchett's face when she'd understood that nobody had recognized her. The slow arrival of that realization. The particular quality of a person discovering that the thing they'd been managing, the performance, the persona, the carefully constructed public self had been entirely unnecessary. She thought about what Blanchett had said. I could have just walked in. Yes, Mary thought. Most things were simpler than the way people decided to approach them. She named the kittens, Mary said. Nancy glanced at her. Julia and Ramsay. She had them named before she even knew they were kittens, Mary said. She's been thinking about this for a long time. The baking, the show, all of it. She paused. That's not what a guilty person does in a jail visiting room. Nancy was quiet for a moment. No, a beat. It isn't. Carol said nothing, which, from Carol, was its own kind of agreement. The drive back to Vero was quiet and direct, the lagoon keeping pace on the left, the October afternoon doing what it always did, carrying on regardless, steady and unhurried and entirely indifferent to whatever people were working through beside it. That indifference was oddly comforting. It usually was. Chapter 10. What people notice. Days had passed, not enough to make it feel normal, but enough that the shock had settled into something quieter, a low hum underneath ordinary life, present but not overwhelming. Mary had slept. She had made coffee. She had checked her phone more times than usual and found nothing new. Topher was stable. That was still the word. And it was a word that told you almost nothing while sounding like good news. It meant he wasn't worse. It didn't mean he was better. It meant the doctors were watching and waiting and the answer was still somewhere ahead of them. Which was, Mary had decided, the most honest thing a word could do in that situation. She was trying to be patient with it. She was not entirely succeeding. Autumn in the Park had run all weekend at Riverside Park, the Treasure Coast Pilot Club's annual Arts and Crafts Festival, 2 days of vendors and music, and the cheerful energy of a community event that half of Vero Beach attended as a matter of course. The Love of Paws Animal Rescue had run a booth both days. Nancy and Carol had organized it. Mary had helped Saturday morning, and Milo had served as unofficial ambassador, with the focused professionalism of a dog who understood his role and took it seriously. Milo, it turned out, was very good at festivals. He had spent both days stationed near the front of the booth, greeting visitors with the measured enthusiasm of someone who had been briefed on the mission and was committed to it. Children especially, He had a particular quality of stillness around children that made them feel safe, which led to conversations, which led to their parents listening to Nancy explain the adoption process with a quiet efficiency of someone who had given this talk many times and never found it less important. 2 dogs placed, 4 serious inquiries on the cats, a family that came back 3 times before finally admitting they wanted both kittens. By Monday morning the festival was packing up. Vendor tents were coming down in sections. Folding tables moved toward waiting trucks. A few balloons, deflated now, had caught themselves on the low railing near the water. Nancy had texted at 7:30, coming to pick up the cooler and a banner. Bring coffee if you have it. The bench by the water. Milo says hi. Mary had been up since 6, not from worry exactly, but from a restlessness that needed something to do with itself. By 7 she had a tin of blueberry muffins cooling on the counter, and 2 cups of coffee in a small carrier, and by 8:15 she had parked and was guiding Carol along the concrete walkway, through the last of the pack-up activity toward the bench that faced the river. She had also tucked the small Irish cream bottle into her bag. Some mornings it was a ritual and some mornings it was a necessity, and this morning it was both. They passed a Love of Paws spot on their way, the folding table already collapsed. The banner rolled and tucked under Nancy's arm. The cooler sitting on the path waiting to go back to wherever it lived between events. Good weekend? Mary asked. Very good, Nancy said. We placed 2 dogs and got 4 serious inquiries on the cats. She looked at Carol. Tell her about the family. Carol smiled faintly. A family came back 3 times, she said. Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning. They kept saying they weren't ready. On the 3rd visit they adopted both kittens. Both, Mary said. They had 2 children, Carol said. It made sense. It always makes sense, Nancy said. People just need time to admit it. Milo, who had been investigating a particularly interesting patch of grass near the railing, looked up briefly at the sound of his name in someone's tone, decided nothing was required of him, and returned to his investigation. Chairs just ahead, Mary said to Carol. About 4 steps. Carol found it with her cane, reached out, and sat with practiced ease. It's moving today, she said, turning her face toward the water. Little wind, Mary said. Carol nodded. From the north. Mary settled beside her, and reached into her purse to check that the small bottle of Irish cream was there. It was. It always was. The Indian River lagoon stretched out in front of them, wide, unhurried, catching the mid-morning light in long silver strips. A pelican drifted past at eye level, improbably graceful for its size, and disappeared around the bend. Further out, a small motorboat moved north without any apparent hurry. Mary watched it until it rounded the curve toward the Veterans Memorial Island. She had been carrying too many things for 2 days. Not badly. Not in a way that showed on the outside or made her difficult to be around. Just the way that women of a certain age had learned to carry things, steadily, without announcement, with the awareness that putting them down entirely wasn't an option, and the next best thing was to distribute the weight evenly. Toffa, Blanchette, the unanswered smell, the woman with the red beads. None of it resolved, all of it still present. She reached for the Irish cream. Nancy appeared from the north end of the path a few minutes later, and she was not alone. Milo moved ahead of her on a red leash with the calm authority of a dog, who had survived whatever he had survived and arrived at the conclusion that the world was mostly interesting and worth investigating. He was medium-sized, golden and white, with a thick wavy coat that caught the morning light, and a slightly scruffy face that suggested he had opinions and was choosing, for now, not to share them. He had come from Puerto Rico 2 years ago via a rescue organization, and Nancy had once mentioned with complete seriousness that he was still working on his English. He had also, apparently, been working at the Love of Paws booth all weekend, greeting strangers and being generally excellent at it. He arrived now with the satisfied air of a dog, who had done good work, and was ready for a rest. He registered Mary and Carol immediately, nose lifting, head swinging toward them with focused attention. Little man, Nancy said, as he pulled toward the bench. Give them a moment. Milo did not give them a moment. He went straight to Mary first, sniffing her shoes and hands with the thoroughness of someone reviewing important documents. Then he moved to Carol, conducted an equally serious investigation, and leaned the full weight of his body against her ankle. Carol reached down without hesitation. Hello. Milo accepted the scratch behind his ear with dignified appreciation. He smells Simba on you. Nancy said to Mary, and Nina on Carol. He always knows, Mary said. Nancy took the offered coffee cup. Mary reached for the bottle. Bless it a little, Nancy said. Mary tilted the Irish cream over her cup. Carol turned her face slightly toward Mary. Carol. Yes, Carol said. I'm not driving today. Nancy let out a short laugh. Mary smiled and added a splash to Carol's cup. Milo, satisfied with his investigations, relocated to a sunny patch of concrete nearby, turned twice with great deliberation, and settled himself down with a sigh that suggested the morning had already asked a great deal of him. Natalie and Ron came along the path from the parking lot direction a few minutes later, Ron carrying a takeout bag. Natalie already in conversation before she reached the bench. How is he? She asked. Still stable, Mary said. Natalie shook her head. Poor man. A moment passed. Mary looked at the water. 2 days stable meant 2 days without answers. 2 days of doctors watching a screen and waiting for the toxicology panel to return something useful. 2 days of Topher in a bed in a room with a window, and presumably a terrible television. She had heard through Marcy that his staff member Marco had kept M Bakery open. Not the same without Topher. Nothing would be, but open. That felt important somehow. The place continuing. The coffee still being made. She wondered if he knew they were working on it. She hoped, somehow, that he did. Blanchett is still in custody, Carol said quietly. Mary turned back to the group. She didn't take it. Probably not, Nancy said. Mary glanced at her. Probably? Nancy picked up her cup. We don't know what we don't know yet. Nobody argued with that. It was the most honest thing anyone had said about either situation in 2 days. Ron set the bag down. Pastries. I didn't know what else to do. Nobody argued with that either. They ate for a moment, something to do with their hands while the morning settled around them. A pair of egrets stood motionless in the shallows near the walkway, white and unhurried, as if they had been there since before the park existed and planned to stay long after. Behind them, the last of the festival vendors were loading their vans with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this many times and knew which parts of it to hurry and which to take slowly. We were here Saturday, Natalie said, looking around the park, for the festival. The whole thing was wonderful. Half of Vero was here Saturday, Nancy said. There was a jewelry vendor, Natalie continued, with the most beautiful pieces. Some of them were Spanish colonial reproductions, medallions, crucifixes. She glanced at Ron. Ron stood at that table for 20 minutes. 15, Ron said. He was comparing everything to the auction catalog he had tucked under his arm. Natalie said. Ron didn't disagree. It's this week, he said. Jupiter, Wednesday. Something in his expression shifted. The focus of a man who had been thinking about one thing for several weeks. There's a piece in the preview I've had my eye on for a while. A triptych. 3 hinged panels that fold together for travel, like a small portable altar. The central panel has a relief image of Santiago St. James, patron saint of Spain. A wealthy passenger would have carried something like this for private devotion, not cargo. Personal. He shook his head slightly. Someone prayed with that piece on the voyage out. Maybe on the night the storm came in. He paused. And lot 42, a St. Christopher medallion. St. Christopher was the patron saint of travelers and sailors, so a piece like this would have been worn around the neck. Every day, on every voyage. This one is gold, larger than a modern charm, more the size of a large coin but heavier. The relief is still legible after 300 years. He paused. Someone wore that on the night of July 31st, 1715. 7 days out of Havana. He's mentioned it once or twice, Natalie said. Because it's significant, Ron said, without apology. Is it near the lighthouse? Carol asked. Ron considered. 10 minutes, maybe. Why? Carol set her cup down. I'd like to see it. I've been watching videos about it. She paused. Did you know the lighthouse was designed by a young army engineer named George Meade? Nancy glanced at her. George Meade. 10 years after he designed the Jupiter Lighthouse, Carol said. He was a general. He defeated Robert E. Lee at Gettysburg. Ron set his glass down slowly. The man who built our lighthouse beat Lee at Gettysburg, Nancy said. Designed it, Carol said. And yes. Mary looked at her. How do you find these things? Carol smiled. I watch a lot of YouTube. Ron nodded slowly, surprised by information he felt he should have had already. I've been going to that lighthouse for 15 years, he said. I did not know that. There's a very good video about it, Carol said. Would you send me the link? Ron said. I'd very much like to watch it. Of course, Carol said, as if she sent YouTube links regularly, which Mary suspected she did. Then we'll do both, Mary said. Lighthouse first, then the auction. Natalie and I will drive down separately, Ron said. I want to get there before it opens. Milo raised his head briefly from his sunny patch, assessed the situation, determined nothing had changed significantly, and went back to sleep. They finished their coffee and the pastries, which were good enough to briefly make everything feel manageable the way good food sometimes did. Mary's blueberry muffins went quickly. Ron had two without comment, which was the highest form of praise he generally offered. When they stood to leave, the egrets and the shallows still hadn't moved. Mary watched them for a moment, white against the silver water, perfectly still, waiting for something the rest of the world couldn't see yet. She thought about patience, about the discipline of holding things without resolution, about what it meant to pay attention without jumping ahead of what you actually knew. The egrets were very good at this. She was working on it. We pay attention, she said. Not quite to anyone. Yes, Carol said. And we don't jump to conclusions, Nancy added, with a slight edge that suggested she was talking to herself as much as anyone. Mary smiled. Milo was already pulling Nancy toward the parking lot, decisive, ready for whatever came next. They walked back along the concrete path, the Indian River keeping pace on their left, steady, unhurried, entirely indifferent to whatever people brought to its banks. That indifference was oddly comforting. It usually was. Before they reached the cars, Carol said, tomorrow morning, my house. Ron wants to go through the catalog properly before Wednesday. Nobody argued. Some mornings resolved themselves that simply.